I hadn't planned on spending the weekend alone, but when my wife packed her bags and left for her sister's wedding 3 states over, I found myself with the rare luxury of solitude. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy her company, I did, but the idea of a weekend to myself was a tempting prospect. I had mapped out my time perfectly. A few rounds of golf, a good bottle of whiskey, and maybe catching up on that crime series I'd been meaning to finish. That plan, however, unraveled. With one phone call. "Hey, sweetheart." My wife's voice came through the speaker, cheerful and just a touch hurried. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." I glanced at the clock. It was barely past noon, and I'd just cracked open my first beer. "Not at all," I replied, kicking my feet up on the coffee table. "How's the wedding chaos going?" "Oh, you know how it is. Absolute madness. Listen, I need a favor." The tone of her voice made my foot slide off the table. "A favor?" "Yeah. Alex is passing through town tonight. He's on his way back from some football thing with his buddies. His flight got canceled and he's kind of stranded. I told him he could crash at our place." I sat up, rubbing my forehead. Alex, her nephew. I hadn't seen him in over a year. Not since that awkward Thanksgiving dinner where he towered over everyone else, charming and effortlessly confident. He had just turned 22, built like he belonged on a magazine cover, and always seemed to have this casual grin like he was in on a joke the rest of us weren't privy to. "I wasn't really planning on company," I said, glancing around the room, which was littered with evidence of my weekend plans. Chips, a bottle of whiskey, and a stack of old magazines. "Oh, come on. It's just one night," she coaxed. "He's good kid. You'll barely know he's there." I hesitated, but the silence stretched too long. "Fine," I sighed, leaning back. "One night." "Thank you," she chirped, her voice laced with relief. "I knew I could count on you. He'll be there around 7. I hung up, staring at the phone for a moment longer than necessary. The room seemed quieter than before, the weekend's peaceful promise. Now slightly cracked. I wasn't exactly thrilled at the idea of playing host, but there was a part of me, an unspoken part, that didn't mind it either. I shook off the thought and downed the rest of my beer, trying to ignore the flutter of anticipation that I couldn't quite explain. At exactly 7 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I set my beer bottle down, took a steadying breath, and opened the door. There he was, Alex, framed by the dim glow of the porch light, his silhouette cutting a tall, athletic figure against the fading dusk. He wore a fitted black t-shirt that stretched over broad shoulders, a duffel bag slung casually over one shoulder. His hair was a little longer than I remembered, tousled just enough to look effortless. He flashed me a grin, all white teeth and easy confidence. "Hey, Uncle," he said, stepping forward and shaking my hand firmly. His grip was strong, his hand warm. "Good to see you, Alex," I replied, stepping aside so he could come in. His presence seemed to fill the space instantly, making my modest living room feel smaller. He tossed his bag by the entryway and took a look around, nodding approvingly. "Nice place. I forgot how cozy it is." "Cozy is one word for it," I chuckled, shutting the door behind him. "Hope you don't mind a bit of clutter." "I wasn't exactly expecting company." He laughed, a deep, throaty sound that felt oddly comforting. "Nah, it's fine. Trust me, I've been living out of hotel rooms with 3 other guys for the past week. This is paradise in comparison." I led him to the kitchen where I had a modest dinner set up. Nothing fancy, just some pasta and a side salad. He dug in enthusiastically, and I poured us both a glass of wine. Conversation started slow, the usual catching up. How's school? How's football? What's your major again? But Alex had a way of talking that made everything sound interesting. He spoke about his classes, his workouts, his team's latest championship game, and the way his eyes lit up as he described scoring the final touchdown was infectious. I found myself genuinely listening, genuinely laughing. He had this energy about him, this raw confidence that made everything seem a little more vivid. His hands gestured as he spoke, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. I couldn't help but notice how his biceps flexed slightly every time he leaned back to laugh, how his jaw clenched when he chewed thoughtfully. I caught myself staring a couple of times, quickly snapping back to reality, and shoveling another forkful of pasta to cover my distraction. After dinner, we moved to the living room. I cracked open a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving, and he accepted a glass with that same easy grin. "Just one," he said, but I could already tell that one wouldn't be enough. We sank into the leather couches, the warmth of the whiskey spreading through my chest as we settled deeper into conversation. It started with harmless banter, old family stories, embarrassing childhood moments, but as the bottle grew lighter, the stories grew bolder. Alex had a way of drawing me out, getting me to talk about things I hadn't thought about in years. His laugh was genuine, his gaze attentive. I almost forgot he was family. At one point he leaned back, stretching his arms behind his head, and I couldn't help but glance at the way his shirt lifted slightly, revealing just a hint of toned stomach. He caught me looking, I think, but if he did, he didn't show it. Instead, he just smiled and poured us both another drink. "So, how's married life treating you?" he asked, his eyes never leaving mine. I shrugged, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "It's good. Comfortable, you know." He nodded, taking a slow sip. "Comfortable's not always a good thing." His voice was soft, almost introspective. Raised an eyebrow. "No, what's wrong with comfortable?" He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Comfortable isn't always real. Sometimes it's just settling." His eyes met mine, and for a moment I felt exposed, like he could see right through me. The room felt smaller then, the space between us more noticeable. I cleared my throat and forced a laugh, breaking the silence. "Well, I guess you have. It all figured out, huh?" He just smiled, leaning back and taking another sip of whiskey. "Not yet, but I'm getting there." I didn't know if it was the alcohol or the confidence in his smile, but for the first time that evening, I felt my guard slipping, just a little. The hours slipped away as easily as the whiskey poured, each glass making the room feel warmer, the space between us smaller. I wasn't sure how it happened, but the conversation had drifted from light-hearted banter to something more personal, more raw. Alex leaned back in the armchair, his long legs stretched out and crossed at the ankles, holding his glass delicately between his fingers. His gaze was steady, focused, and completely unguarded. It was the kind of openness I wasn't used to. Not with family, not with friends, maybe not even with my wife. "College has been different," he confessed, staring at the dark liquid swirling in his glass. "I mean, I like it. Don't get me wrong. Football's great, classes are fine, but sometimes it feels like I'm just going through the motions, you know?" I nodded, surprised by his honesty. "I get that," I replied, leaning back in my own chair. "I think everyone feels that at some point. It's like you're moving forward, but you're not really sure where you're going." Alex's eyes met mine, and there was something unspoken there, a flicker of recognition. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Exactly." We sat in silence for a moment, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the stillness. I took another sip of whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through my veins. "You got someone waiting for you back at school?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. He shrugged, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Not really," he admitted. "I mean, I've dated here and there. Nothing serious. Too much on my plate, I guess." I nodded, understanding the sentiment. "Well, you're still young. Plenty of time for all that." He chuckled softly, eyes fixed on his glass. "Yeah, I guess." There was a pause, the kind that stretches just a little too long, teetering on the edge of awkward. But before it could, "Tip," he spoke again. "What about you? Been married for what, 10 years now?" 11, I corrected him. "Feels like forever sometimes," he smirked. "Good forever or bad forever?" I laughed, the sound coming out sharper than I intended. "Depends on the day, I suppose." He took a long drink, his eyes never leaving mine. "You ever get bored?" The question caught me off guard, and I shifted in my seat, staring into my glass as if the answer might be hiding at the bottom. "I think everyone does at some point," I replied cautiously. "Doesn't mean it's bad, just comfortable." Comfortable, he echoed, nodding thoughtfully. His eyes lingered on mine for a beat too long before he set his glass down on the table. You know, sometimes I think comfortable is just a fancy word for stuck. His words hung heavy in the air, and I found myself unable to look away. I wasn't sure if it was the whiskey dulling my judgment or the way his eyes seemed to pierce right through me, but something in that moment felt different. Maybe, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Maybe it is. Before I could process it, he reached out and clapped a hand on my shoulder, firm but gentle. Hey, he said, his touch lingering just a moment too long. I didn't mean to get all philosophical on you. It's probably the booze talking. I chuckled nervously, shrugging off the tension that had settled between us. No, it's fine, I said, glancing down at his hand still resting on my shoulder. His grip was strong, his thumb brushing just slightly against the fabric of my shirt. It's nice to talk like this, he smiled, and for a moment I saw a flash of something unguarded in his expression. Yeah, he agreed, his voice softening. It is. We both paused, and in that silence I realized just how close we were sitting, how the space that once felt vast now seemed non-existent. His hand slipped away, but the warmth of it lingered, and I felt a flicker of something dangerous, something I hadn't felt in years. He cleared his throat, leaning back into the couch and stretching his arms over his head. Man, I needed this, he admitted, his voice breaking the spell. It's been a while since I just talked to someone. Yeah, I replied, my throat dry. Me too. He looked at me then, really looked, and I could feel his eyes studying my face, as if searching for something just beneath the surface. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Instead, I took another sip of whiskey, desperate to drown the thoughts that had begun to swirl. The ones that crept into places I wasn't ready to explore. But it was too late. The tension was there, simmering just below the surface, waiting for something, anything, to bring it to a boil. And as Alex leaned back, stretching out with a casual confidence, I couldn't help but wonder if he felt it too. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, each movement of its hands seeming to echo in the stillness of the room. I wasn't entirely sure how late it had gotten. The whiskey bottle sat nearly empty between us, its amber liquid reduced to just a couple of swallows. Alex leaned back in his chair, legs stretched out and crossed at the ankles, his eyes half-lidded but sharp. He seemed more relaxed, more open, as if the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders. So, he began, swirling the last bit of whiskey in his glass. You ever wonder what things would be like if you'd made different choices? I raised an eyebrow, his sudden shift in tone catching me off guard. I think everyone does, I replied, setting my own glass down. It's human nature, I guess. He nodded thoughtfully, eyes fixed on the swirling liquid. Yeah, I never expected to feel the way I do sometimes. Something about his voice, soft, almost vulnerable, made me sit up a little straighter. What do you mean? He glanced up at me, his gaze steady and unflinching. I guess I never really put myself in a box, like I never thought I had to be one thing or another. My stomach tightened, my heartbeat quickening just a touch. One thing or another. He took a slow sip of his drink, swallowing hard before setting the glass down with a quiet clink. I've always liked people. Doesn't really matter who they are, If there's a connection, there's a connection. I blinked, processing his words. So, you're saying... He shrugged, his shoulders lifting with an almost casual grace. I'm saying that I don't limit myself. Guys, girls, if there's chemistry, I don't see the point in fighting it. A chill ran through me, though the room felt uncomfortably warm. I couldn't tell if it was the whiskey or the way his eyes lingered on mine, but I felt rooted to the spot, unable to look away. That's surprisingly honest, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex smiled, leaning back in his chair and stretching his arms behind his head. Why wouldn't I be honest? It's just the two of us here, no judgment. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly, trying to act unaffected even though my mind was racing. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unspoken. I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting for some kind of response. "Does that bother you?" he asked, his voice gentle, unassuming. I shook my head, perhaps too quickly. No, not at all." He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by my flustered reaction. "You sure? You seem a little nervous." "Nervous?" I let out a sharp laugh, forcing myself to lean back and act casual. "I'm not nervous." He smiled again, slower this time, as if savoring the moment. "Good." We fell into silence again, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze, afraid of what I might see if I did. But he wasn't done talking. "You know," he began, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. "I always thought you were, I don't know, different." That got my attention. I glanced up, my brow furrowed. "Different how?" Alex leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He was closer now, his presence almost suffocating in its intensity. "When I was younger, coming over for those family dinners, I always thought you were cool. I liked talking to you more than anyone else." I chuckled nervously. "I'm flattered." He shook his head, his eyes never leaving mine. "No, it was more than that. I guess I just felt like you understood me, like you saw me." My heart thudded painfully in my chest, and I forced myself to keep breathing. "Of course I saw you, Alex. You were just a kid back then." His gaze softened, his eyes searching mine. "Maybe, but it didn't stop me from noticing you." I froze. The room felt like it had shrunk around us, walls pressing in tighter and tighter. "Noticing me?" I repeated, my voice shaky. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yeah, I noticed you. I still do." The words hung in the air, suspended in time. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know if I even could say anything. My mind was racing, my palms sweating against the leather armrests. I tried to speak, to break the tension, but nothing came out. He leaned back, his eyes never leaving mine. "Did I say too much?" he asked softly. I swallowed hard, shaking my head, even though my mind screamed otherwise. No, you didn't." "Good," he replied, a smile tugging at his lips. He stood up slowly, stretching his arms above his head before grabbing the whiskey bottle. "I think we need a little more of this." I watched him as he poured, his hands steady, movements fluid. When he handed me my glass, his fingers brushed mine, lingering for just a second too long. My breath hitched and I saw him smile, just the slightest hint of satisfaction flickering in his eyes. He raised his glass, and I did the same, though my hands were shaking just enough to spill a few drops. He watched me carefully, his gaze never faltering. "To honesty," he said, his voice low and steady. "To honesty," I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. We drank, our eyes locked, the silence between us thicker than it had ever been. He didn't move away, didn't sit back down. He just stood there watching me with an intensity that I couldn't quite understand, but wanted to. And in that silence, I realized that there was no going back. The silence between us stretched, long and heavy, filling the room with a tension that neither of us seemed willing to break. Alex stood there, whiskey glass in hand, his eyes steady on mine. There was a challenge in his gaze, a dare that lingered in the flicker of his smile, the slight tilt of his head. I swallowed hard, feeling the warmth of the whiskey in my veins, but knowing that what was coursing through me had very little to do with alcohol. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I nodded, unable to form words. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain he could hear it. Alex stepped closer, setting his glass down on the table beside me. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he was testing the waters, waiting for me to flinch or pull back. But I didn't move. I couldn't. His hand came to rest on my shoulder, his touch warm and grounding. My breath hitched as he leaned in, just a little, his eyes still locked on mine. "You seem tense," he murmured, his voice dropping to a whisper. I forced a chuckle, but it came out strained. It's been a long day. His hand squeezed my shoulder gently, his thumb brushing along the fabric of my shirt. Maybe you just need to relax. The words hung heavy between us, and I didn't dare breathe. He was too close. His scent, something clean and sharp, like cedar and rain, was all I could smell. I opened my mouth to speak, to say anything that might break the tension, but nothing came out. He leaned in just a fraction more, his eyes searching mine. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. I didn't. I couldn't. And then his lips brushed mine, softly at first, tentative, as if testing the boundaries. I felt my body tense, instinct fighting against something deeper, something I'd buried long. The ego. But his hand stayed firm on my shoulder, grounding me, anchoring me to this moment. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine, looking for resistance, for hesitation. He didn't find it. I didn't know who moved first, but suddenly the space between us disappeared, and his mouth was on mine. No longer gentle, but confident, assured. His hands found my shoulders, sliding down to my back, pulling me closer as I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands found his waist, tentative at first, then bolder as the rush of adrenaline surged through me. He tasted, like whiskey and something sweeter, something I couldn't name but wanted more of. His body was firm against mine, strong and unyielding, yet gentle in the way his hands moved, like he knew exactly where I needed to be touched. We broke apart. For air, both of us breathing heavily, eyes locked. "I've wanted that for a long time," he whispered, his voice rough, raw. I stared at him, my mind still reeling, my body unwilling to pull away. "I didn't know." He smiled, his hand coming up to cup my face, thumb brushing over my cheek. "I did." That was all it took. The walls I'd spent years building came crashing down. I pulled him back to me, my hands gripping his waist as his mouth found mine again. The kisses deepened, grew hungrier, more desperate, as if we were both afraid the chiots moment would shatter if we let go. His hands slid under my shirt, fingertips grazing bare skin, and I shivered at the touch, my own hands wandering up his back, feeling the strength and solidity of him. He was warmth and strength, and I found myself clinging to him, afraid that if I let go, reality would crash back in and steal this moment away. "Are you sure?" I whispered against his lips, the question coming out before I could stop it. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, his expression softening. "I've never been more sure of anything." That was all I needed. The hours that followed blurred together. Soft whispers, gentle touches, hands exploring places I hadn't allowed myself to consider. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was unhurried, careful, almost reverent. He moved, with a tenderness that surprised me, his hands never demanding, always offering. We found our way to the couch, then to the floor, the bottle of whiskey long forgotten. The light from the kitchen spilled over us, casting long shadows on the wall, dancing across our entwined forms. His laughter came easily, filling the room with warmth as we talked and shared bits of ourselves I hadn't known I was ready to share. He told me about college, about his dreams, about the nights he spent wondering if he'd ever find someone who understood him. I told him things I hadn't spoken out loud in years, about the loneliness I'd grown accustomed to, about the comfort that had turned to complacency, and how I never realized how empty I'd been until now. He listened, really listened, his gaze never wavering, and I felt seen in a way I hadn't before, like the layers I'd built up over the years had been stripped away, leaving only the truth. At some point, the conversation faded, replaced by gentle caresses and whispered promises. His touch was warm, his breath steady against my skin, and I found myself melting into him, unafraid, unashamed. When sleep finally claimed us, his head rested on my shoulder, his arm draped over my chest. I lay there in the quiet, the room dark and still, my mind replaying every moment in vivid detail. I didn't feel guilt or regret, just a deep, bone-settling sense of peace. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The soft glow of morning, light filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes of gold across the living room floor. I blinked awake, the haze of sleep lifting slowly, and for a moment, I was disoriented. The whiskey bottle on the coffee table, the rumpled blankets sprawled across the floor, the warmth of someone nestled beside me. It all came rushing back in a flood of memory. Alex lay next to me, his arm draped lazily over my chest, his breathing soft and even. His hair was tousled, a lock of it falling over his forehead, and his face looked peaceful, content. I stared up at the ceiling for a long moment, processing everything that had happened. Last night felt surreal, like stepping through a doorway I hadn't known existed. Yet here we were, and I didn't feel regret, not even a hint of it. Alex stirred, stretching slightly before his eyes fluttered open. He looked at me and smiled, a slow, easy grin that made my heart jump. "Morning," he said, his voice still, heavy with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my voice catching in my throat. For a moment we just lay there, neither of us moving. I half expected him to pull away, to apologize or laugh it off as a mistake. But he didn't. He just watched me with that same calm confidence, like everything that happened had been perfectly natural. "You hungry?" I asked, finally breaking the silence. He grinned, his stomach growling right on cue. "Starving." We untangled ourselves and got to our feet, the air surprisingly light between us. I busied myself in the kitchen, cracking eggs into a pan, slicing bread, and brewing coffee. Alex leaned against the counter, watching me with a kind of quiet amusement, his arms crossed and his smile never faltering. We ate at the small breakfast nook by the window, sunlight spilling over the table, warming the room. I couldn't help but steal glances at him, how relaxed he seemed, how easily he moved through my space, like he belonged there. I hadn't felt this kind of energy in my house for a long time. "So," I began, clearing my throat. "About last night," he raised an eyebrow, pausing mid-bite. "Yeah," I set my fork down, meeting his gaze. That wasn't what I expected. A smile spread across his lips, his eyes brightening with amusement. Me neither. We both chuckled, the tension dissolving. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms behind his head. "But I'm not sorry it happened." The admission settled between us, soft and certain. I nodded, feeling the weight of honesty drape over me. Me neither. We finished breakfast without another word about it, instead slipping into light conversation, sports, travel, his college plans. It felt normal, comfortable, like this wasn't something that would hang heavy over our heads. When the plates were cleared and the coffee drained, Alex stood, stretching his long frame with a groan. "I should probably get going," he said, his tone reluctant. I nodded, my chest tightening just a little. "Yeah, of course." He grabbed his duffel bag from the corner of the living room and turned back to me. For a second, I thought he might say something more, but instead he just stepped forward and hugged me. Firm, unhurried. I returned the embrace, my hands resting on his back, feeling the solid warmth of him for what I knew would be the last time in a while. When he pulled away, there was a glimmer in his eyes, a quiet understanding. "I'll be back around," he said simply, slinging the bag over his shoulder. I forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, I'd like that." He flashed me one last grin, then slipped out the door, leaving the space emptier than I ever remembered it being. I stood there for a long while after he left, staring at the spot where he'd been. The house was quiet again, the ticking of the clock resuming its steady rhythm. I moved back to the breakfast nook, sank into the chair, and stared out the window at the sunlight pouring over the lawn. There was a lingering warmth in my chest, something that refused to fade even as the minutes slipped by. I realized, with startling clarity, that what happened last night wasn't just a mistake. It was a revelation. I'd spent years living in comfort, in predictability, not realizing how much of myself I'd locked away. And now, it was like a part of me had been unwrapped, unfurled for the first time. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't want to. A sense of longing mixed with acceptance settled over me, a heavy but welcome weight. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that things couldn't go back to the way they were. I wasn't sure I wanted them to.